It's time to look at a couple of the other nodes now in exercise 10. So we're going to be looking at paint and effects. So I've got my throwing rocks clip loaded already. Let's start up a new session here, and I'm going to call this rock001, and I'm going to be taking a look at the effects first, and then we'll come back to the paint in just a moment. So hit OK on this, and let's just play this through and take a look at what we've got to deal with. Okay, so here's a nice shot. We're going to do quite a lot of things to this. Most of them are not what the original intention of this shot was. In this original shot, we keyed and rotoed out this guy's head, then replaced the background and a background collar as well. But that's not what we're doing today. What we're doing today is we are exploring a couple of these other nodes over here. So we're going to start with effects over here. And if we just move over to effects here for a second, our interface doesn't really change all that much. The tools we have over the side here are the same. The outputs we have are, or the views we have here are smaller than if you were just working with a roto. But apart from that, the general workspace looks pretty much the same. The only thing we do have, if you look up here, I'm in roto, and now moving to effects, we have a new menu item popping up, which are our filters. So let's have a little look at this. I'm going to just draw. Let's turn the overlays on here, and let's just draw a very quick shape here, just a little circle. And with that circle selected, we'll go through and we'll take a very brief look at each of these filters. Then we'll start to use some of them in context. Right, so we've got black and white here, and over in the object window over here, we have the various methods to convert this to black and white. So at the moment, we're just looking at the luminance. We can take a look at the average of the red, green, and blue, which isn't changing all that much from the luminance, but then we can also look at the individual color channels, including red, green, blue, yellow, and orange. So we get different filters going on there, each of them giving a slightly different way of converting to black and white and making slightly different things pop in the image. You'll also see down here that underneath our objects we now have another little hierarchy going down. We've got our effects. We can open that up and we'll have the various effects that we've got there, and we can turn those effects on and off using the eye, of course, and lock them using the lock. Pretty straightforward. We can also delete them as and when we want to. Alright, so that's black and white. We're going to skip over blemish for a moment, and we're going to look at blur. Make sure that I have my object selected, come over to blur, and guess what blur does? Just zoom in a little bit here. Yep, that's right, blur gives us a blur. Let's turn our overlays off here. This is actually a cool and quite useful filter when we have to obscure certain objects as well in a scene. For example, if we need to take out a number plate or someone's face, we can easily do it with our blur here. And if we need to blend these in a little bit better, just remember in our shape we still have the other. So that's outer for a second. We still have all of the other things that we had before, like the blurs here, the shrink and grow, all of that stuff. Cool, well let's reset all of this here for the moment and take off our blur. We have colour, and this lets us select a colour. Let's take a colour from the scene using the eyedropper here, and we can blend this together using various different blend modes. So we've got tint, hue, luminance, which looks very, very strange, lighten and darken. So tint creates a monochrome image with the whites being replaced with our little colour here, and we have hue, which turns our hue values to whatever the hue of the colour was that we chose up here. Luminance replaces the luminance with the luminance of the colour we chose. So if we take a slightly more than 50%, say 75% colour here. This will now change the luminance, so it's a broad 75%. So all we're seeing here is the colour information changing, not the luminance values. And the same with lighten. Lighten just picks the lightest pixel out of either the colour here or the original and shows the lightest one, and darken does the opposite. So takes the darkest pixel out of the colour and our original and shows the darkest one. Cool, and that's colour. We'll have a look at that again later. I skip over a couple of these, come back to those again. We have another good one for doing obscuring of certain objects, the classic mosaic. That we can come in, just in case wearing a turn that off. Yeah, just in case wearing a big green stocking over your head doesn't obscure your face enough, you've got the mosaic here as well. Classic mosaic, everyone loves it. And a close relation of the mosaic is the scatter. So what the scatter does is it just takes the original pixels and just jumbles them up a little bit. Again, to obscure people or an object here, or actually just to add a bit of randomness. Sometimes that's good to hide another effect that you've done. Now all of the effects also have an opacity, so you can blend them back with the original image. Lovely. All right. Then the next set of effects we've got here are some more utility effects. We've taken a look at colour. Let's look at colour correct. Colour correct, just make sure our overlay's back on so you can see what's going on here. Colour correct just lets us do small colour changes within our shape. So we've got the hue, saturation, brightness. We can increase the contrast as well. We have the centre point here, which works in conjunction with the contrast to figure out where it is we want to add the centre point of our contrasted area. So we can move it back and forth, changing where we blow out those particular areas. So we can crank the contrast up quite high, and instead of blowing out or clipping the blacks, which we would do if it was set to normal, we can come in and put the emphasis on the lighter colours there, so we're blowing out the brighter colours there instead. Or we can also adjust things like the gamma and the individual red, green and blue channels. And this can come in handy if you want to do just a little bit of secondary colour correction within Silhouette FX. Cool, let's take out the colour correct there. We are going to come to some of these in a bit more detail, so we'll just skip over some of these and look at them a bit later. We've got grain here to add a bit of noise into your image. Blemish, which is there to remove small blemishes and is basically a combination of blur and grain. We also have scratch here as well. Let's look at what scratch is doing. Let's come a bit of our ground down here maybe. What scratch is really designed for is it's designed for removing scratches, film scratches. So generally it works best on smaller images, but let's have a look what we can do here. Just going to create a very small X-spline here, and let's call this one scratch shape. Come to scratch. Let's make sure I have that selected. Come to scratch. Turn my overlay off. And I can adjust the width here, and it's blending the pixels from the left hand side and the right hand side together to remove that little blemish there. And if I come in here and I blur this up a little bit, maybe you can blur this outer, maybe not as much, maybe a bit more, we can actually get away with that probably. Let's have a little look. There we go. But the real utility of Scratch is really for small film scratches in your frame. But we can use it for other things. Might even work for this lamppost here. Let's come in, take the width up, match that up a little bit more, maybe come into our lamppost here, blur that up. It's a quick little effect, but I think we can get away with that one there. So cool, that's Scratch. Let's take a look what Blemish does. Let's call this Scratch lamppost. I'm going to lock all these up. I am going to save these two here just so you can have a little look what they're doing on the saved project file. And let's come in and let's use my X-Spline again and just do a very rough shape around this face here. Because I want to have a look at Blemish. Let's come in and we'll go Blemish face here. Because the actual filter we're using at the moment is more important in the hierarchy than what it is we're blemishing or de-blemishing. So if I turn Blemish on here, you can see automatically in the effects list down here, it's given us both grain and a blur. Now this layer order of the effects is very, very important because it determines obviously which one goes first. So let's hide the grain for just one moment. We'll just come to blur itself and turn my overlay off. And let's blur this face up quite a lot. And again, let's do an outer blur on that. Might take it a little bit too far, and then use the shrink grow just to wheel it back in a little bit. Cool, so let's before and after. Now the only thing is here, if we were to just zoom out, we can see we've got an unnaturally flat area going on there. Because we blurred everything up, we've lost all of the sort of natural grain, the natural noise that was there within the footage. And that's what this grain is going to give us back. It's going to give us back that noise. Now I turn that back on, it's actually going to give us back quite a lot of noise because the default settings here are they're not subtle. Let's just say they let you know that you've applied a grain. So let's take a little look at the individual color channels here and try and match this grain up a little bit better. So just turn my red channel on here and take my red amount down here to 0. Then if I hold down the Command or Control key, I can just raise that up just a little bit until I see that we're getting a sort of matching amount of noise going on in the image. And you can see I've only taken it to 1. I might take it just a little bit higher, but we don't need it that much higher. And so the difference between nothing and a little bit is huge. And let's do the same with green and blue. So you can see too much grain stands out like an absolute sore thumb. So best to dial it all the way back. And we'll keep this nice and subtle. Just need a little bit in there. The size here is all about the size of the bits of noise. So if I take this up, we get larger areas of noise. Hang on, let's take that up quite a lot. So as I take that up, yeah, we get larger areas of noise. We take it down, we get very, very small, fine grain. In this case, I'm going to take it, actually we'll leave it at 1, that's probably all right there for that. Take this all the way down. And just take that, yeah, maybe just about 112. And do the blue again the same way. Take that all the way down. Then hold down Command or Control just to bring that up just a slight bit. I did a little bit more here, and probably bring the size up a little bit as well. Cool. Actually, we've also got softness here. So if I crank all this up, the softness sort of just adds a very, very subtle little bit of blurring to it as well. And we like subtlety sometimes. Cool, so let's take a look at the difference that grain makes. Turn it off and back on. Hopefully you can see that. I actually probably doubt you can see something this subtle once the video is being recorded. But definitely check it out for yourself. The source material is here for you, so definitely check it out yourself, and it makes a huge difference. But yeah, I seriously doubt that after it's gone through the compression to reach you, that it's going to be quite as noticeable a difference. We could also stick in, actually at this point, with the blemish on the face, stick in a little color correct, just to tap the brightness down just a little bit. It has blurred everything out a little too much, maybe a little bit of contrast as well. So before and after. There we go. The other thing I want to just have a look at is just showing a nice use for the colour as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually roto this box here. Let's have a look at what it does. Apart from shifting around in the frame, at some point it gets knocked down by a stone. So what we can do is use the colour here to take out the background here and replace it with just a solid colour. And this type of obscuration is fairly commonplace. So I'm going to add a new layer here. Call this one box. And the reason I'm adding a new layer is I'm going to track it. It's just easier to work with it like that. So let's come in, hit create, and come in, and we'll look at this little character here. Hopefully that should give us a good track. And let's look at the RGB values on this one. Sharpen it all up, contrast it up. So we've got some nice edges there, nice sort of discernible pattern. Definitely going to add a little bit of blur, quite a bit of denoise there. And let's track it through a couple of frames. Just as it's getting knocked down. Lovely. Let's track it backwards first. Cool. Let's see if I can get any more information out of that. It's doing actually pretty well. Change my behavior to every frame because it is going to be changing so drastically there, and it's just gone out of frame completely there, so we're going to have to just work it by hand after that, but that's cool. So let's select our box, hit apply, hit OK, move our tracker down to the bottom so it's not in the way. I can even delete it at this point. Actually, we're not going to be doing anything else with it. And let's create our shape. Start off with a little square. Going to turn this to foreground just to speed everything up. So by turning it to foreground, I'm not going to be rendering any of the other effects. I'm just going to be solely concentrated on this box here. And let's call this box back. See if I need to do any work to it. Going to add another keyframe here. So box back, let's go add key. So right click or control click. Take it there and then I can come into my transform. And let's just reposition this a little bit. Oh, I see. I've actually made a little bit of a boo-boo there. I was not point matching. So it was distorting in the wrong sort of area. Just go to our reshape tool and just reshape that a little bit. I think that's it. Slipped up a little bit. Cool. And I can turn it off there. So come to this frame, turn it off as we've done before, and turn it back on. And come to our output, come to color. And we'll use the eyedropper to select a nice little blue there. It's standing out a little bit like a sore thumb, so we're going to add some grain to this just to make it a little bit more seamless. Add a little bit of grain in there, do the same things we did before. In fact, we could probably come into our blemish here, copy that, remove that grain there and paste that in. Just drag that into that one there. Cool. So it's still sticking out a little bit like a sore thumb. The reason for that is we haven't blurred it up. As soon as we add a bit of blur, out to blur and then shrink it back again. So that just gives us a bit of control. Yeah, so that's looking probably all right. We can have a little render through that. Cool, and it obscures what we were trying to do. It doesn't, scream out at us and says, say, look here, we're being obscured. It sort of just sits and does what it does. Cool. Okay, so those are really the filters that we have to look at here. They can be rather useful. What we're going to look at now is trying to separate out this set of leaves that we've got in the foreground here. We're going to try and separate those out from the rest of the image. Yes, it's a fairly tricky proposition. All right, so let's create a new session on the same footage, and I'll call this one Rock 002. One of the things I really want to have a look at is the paint node, but we need to use this in context with the other nodes we have going on here as well. And this is why I have created my chart. And this is Ben's pain versus reward scale. And this goes to the heart of what I try to do when I'm creating an alpha channel. So if we have a look here, we have our sort of gradually more difficult or more time consuming or generally more tiresome jobs as we go down the list. So obviously the fastest and least painful thing to do to separate out objects is to do nothing at all and not separate them out. Obviously that's not going to be possible in most of the jobs that get sent over for Roto, so that's why it's at number 1 as the easiest thing to do, but it also has the lowest reward as well. The next thing that I try to do when creating an alpha channel is either try to pull a key or create a procedural matte, as we've looked at in previous exercises. The advantage of these, this is absolutely clear. It's a whole lot faster to do this and get this set up properly. So it saves us a whole load of work. It can also be a bit more accurate as well, especially for fine things like hair and even some sort of environmental effects, things like smoke and mist. You can get these separated out a lot of the time, a lot more easily using keys and procedural mattes than you can by hand rotoing the object. The next thing I've got here is semi-automated roto. This is also known as voodoo keyers. They're sort of keyers where you create partial shapes and let the computer sort the rest of it out for you. An example of this is the PowerMat node in Silhouette Effects, or the Roto brush in After Effects CS5 and above. The success of these tools generally lies within the footage itself. So certain footage is easier to extract the alpha channel using these semi-automated Roto tools than others. For quite a lot of footage, it's not really an option, which leads us to the next in our pain reward scale, and this is manual Roto. So this is a lot of the stuff we've been doing. This can be quite time consuming and take quite a bit of skill, especially to get done right. And that's why it's so far down, but not as far down as Paint. Paint is an option I would choose only when all of the other attempts have failed. It can be excruciatingly time consuming and drawn out to paint individual scenes, and even more difficult to get sort of consistent shapes when on a frame by frame sort of basis. Now, Paint obviously has its place, but to my mind that place is definitely when all the other techniques have failed you. The only thing that I would find more excruciating than having to do everything via Paint is to manually type in all the pixel values by hand. You know, that's really how much I would recommend getting the other stuff working first before going to Paint. Now, as we will see in a few minutes, Paint actually can save you a bit of time if used at the right time in the right place. But generally speaking, it's a complement to these other techniques rather than a sort of immediate replacement. Let's take a look and see what we can do. For now, I'm just going to turn on my keyer and Paint, but we will be coming back to our session settings one more time. Now, when we turn Paint on, we have to choose a paint storage location. Because the paint engine in Silhouette FX 4 is a raster-based paint engine, it means it will be writing out frames to our hard disk. So I'm going to be saving this in the same folder next to the project file. It will tell me the directory doesn't exist, so I hit OK on that again, and it will create that directory for me. So let's take a look at the paint engine. You'll notice that on the left-hand side here, our tools have changed significantly. We've got a whole brand new set of tools that are only for our Paint node. So we switch to all the other nodes, we won't have these same set. Now, the first one we've got selected here is our color brush here, and this is where we can start to just paint on the frame. So if I come into my little swatch down here, I can choose my color and saturation on this wheel here, and I can choose my lightness on the side scroll bar here. And then over on the profile area here, this is where I choose what my brush is going to look like. I can take the brush up larger, take the opacity down, take the softness down to create a hard brush, take the flatness and angle over as well. We'll look at spacing just one moment. Let's turn my overlays on here. Then I can just brush around. You can take the opacity up. It's also going to brush around as well. So it's a fairly fast update on there. If we go to the preferences here, and we come to our paint here as well, we've got a few prefs for how things are reacting. We can turn the cursor, which is this thing here, on and off, or turn it on and off. Hit apply, hit OK. And if we're working with a pen and tablet, we can also use the tablet pressure here. We do have a tablet pressure threshold. So if I set that to 0, I'm adjusting the pressure that I'm setting at the moment, and this is changing the opacity on and off a little bit. Now the pressure threshold here means if I turn this up to a high number here, okay, if I just tap and hardly put any pressure on at all, we're not going to get a shape. But if I put on a whole load of pressure, we're going to get a shape. In fact, I've taken that pressure up so high, it's not even registering that I'm pushing down with all my might. There we go. There's the pressure threshold there. And if I take it off to a certain extent, I can then make nice breaks within the paint without having to lift my brush up and down. And what a lovely state I've left that in there. Luckily I can come down here and choose which channels that I'm working on. We'll look at the Abate Alpha and all the other stuff down here, but I can restore my current frame, all frames, or the work range. So let's restore this current frame. This will delete all of the work that I've done so far on it. And do you know what? I'm actually okay with that. Our little swatches down here, we can store up to 8 different colours up here. So if we have colours that we're always going back to, we can store them just in here, just by clicking and then dropping that over the top there. We can also use blend modes as well. We don't have all the blend modes you can think of available, but we do have things like normal, tint, hue, luminance, lighten and darken. Now the colour tool is the one that we'll be working with the most in this particular exercise, but I do want to show you the clone as well. So if I turn clone on here, we can have up to 10 clone setups, so we can very quickly swap between sources. So let's set up our source here. So at the moment we've got our source set to output, which is showing us, the output of what we had coming in so far. We can also come in to our inputs here and actually set different inputs for the various clones. We can have up to 4 different clone sources, as well as the output and the foreground, making a total of 6. So now I've got my source set to clone 1 here. So if I turn interactive on here, I get my now familiar transformation, little heads up display, and I can now shift the screen over a little bit. We've got this onion skin turned on down here, so we can see the overlay there. If I turn interactive off now and turn my onion skin off as well, just by clicking on it again. So if I zoom in now, I can now come in and paint out this area here. So you can see basically where it's taking the clone source from the image on the left, and where I want to clone on the right hand side underneath the cursor. But if I come back into interactive again, I can now shift that around. Let's bring it over there, for example, turn interactive back off, and the onion skinning as well. Let's bring that in there as well. So we move between foreground and output. We can see that there. Pretty ugly what I've done there, I will admit it. Let's come in and change the tablet pressure threshold back down low again. There we go, that's more like it. Let's turn my interactive back on one more time. Just because I want to show you one other thing we can do. We can also offset in time. So hang on a sec, let's just reset that for the moment. Turn the onion skin off. Let's take a look at something that moves. Pretty much everything's moving at some point. So so what we can do is, instead of offsetting, let's move to the second frame. So instead of offsetting in space, which is what we've just done, we can also offset in time. I'm going to move to another clone here, which is number 2. Keep my clone source to clone number 1. I'm happy with that. Take a look at the interactive one more time. And here I'm going to just increment the frames up a little bit until the frame itself disappears out. This is actually something that's really good if you've got an object that's moving along in time. So it's leaving the old space behind, so we can easily paint out something like a moving car. For instance, in this particular shot, we don't have anything that's that interesting, so it's not going to be quite that fun. But you can just see what's going on. So I turn my interactive back off. Let's take another look at what we've got going down here. We've got a line turned on, which is doing a sort of difference blend mode, just to see if we've got things lined up properly. Again, this is perfectly suited for coming in. Let's turn my interactive back on again here. Turn that into a line. It's perfectly suited for when we are doing that cloning throughout time, just to make sure we've got our spatial stuff matched up, because when we do, all of this should be perfectly grey. Of course, things are moving around a little bit too much in this particular shot, so we're always going to have a slight bit of an outline, but you get the idea. Hopefully we have a vertical split and we have horizontal split as well, so we can just line these up either horizontally or vertically. Cool. Let's turn my interactive back off again, and because we've just lined everything back up again, cloning anything here, it just isn't going to work. Let's move it over here again. There we go. Cool. So we take the opacity down and just sort of clone out small areas here. Cool. All right, that's just a quickie one for clone there. Now, a lot of these tools are destructive enough that I would caution their use when non-destructive alternatives are actually viable for you in regards to time and effort. One of them here is we've got the blemish tool that we saw in the previous section in the effects bit. So this is just let's turn the opacity back up all the way to 100. So it's the same effect, just wrapped up in a brush, so we can just slide it on here, move to the next frame, slide it on there again, move to the next frame, and so on and so forth. And we have the same with the color correction, the grain, and the mosaic here, and scatter down at the bottom. Mustn't forget scatter. We do have an eraser here, and what the eraser does is erases us back to the original frame that we were on. So if we do make a little boo-boo, or we want to erase something a little bit here, we can use the eraser tool to do that, and that will only affect our painted areas, so it won't affect the rest of the image. So what if we did want to paint on the alpha channel? Well, let's come back to our color again here, and we do have the ability to separate out which channels we're working on. So I can just paint on the red channel there. Take a look, looks lovely. And if I paint here just looking at the green, it won't make a difference, but when I look back onto the red, it does. It looks horrible, of course. So let's just restore this current frame. And as you can probably see here, we do have paint on alpha available to us right here. So let's take the paint on red. So let's see what happens now. Still nothing. Now there's two reasons for this. One, the alpha channel of our brush is set to 100% still. How can I see that? Well, it's down here. This is what this slider does. This slider controls the alpha channel of our paintbrush. And if I just paint over here, we still see nothing. And that's because we're looking at the output. And the output here isn't showing us up our alpha channel. Now, if I did look at the alpha channel, we can clearly see that we've taken out this area here. Lovely, and I can move this through the various stages. But why are we not seeing this when we look at the full output here? Well, that's because we need to be looking at our composite. But we don't have a composite here. The composite is actually an extra node that we don't have in our list at the moment. So to add a node, come into our settings, come to our composite here, hit OK. And now by looking at the composite, we can see out to our background. Another thing that the eagle-eyed among you might have seen is that when we switch to our alpha channel here, we do have this sort of rough, weird alpha channel going on at the moment. The reason for that is we have our keyer up here at the top of the flow. So even though we're not using that at the moment, it's set to blue screen, so it is creating a difference here. If I want to just turn this off for the time being, I can just come in, turn the lightning back off. So how do I see my my composite mode here while also working on the paint controls? Because every time I try and switch between the two, the paint is upstream of the composite, so we're seeing, when we see the paint controls here, we're not seeing the proper output of them. Well, that goes to the other icon that we've been carefully ignoring through the rest of the course, and that's the TV screen here. So if I come to the paint node here, quickly double click on the viewer window here, I can now view the output of the composite node while still seeing the paint controls here. So a keyboard shortcut for you: if you hold down the Control or Command key, you can interactively come in and play around with the size of the brush. So if we just paint on that there, I can now come in and paint on the alpha channel, as you can see. Cool. Well, let's put this to some good use. Let's reset all of this, so restore all the frames. So let's come in and do something useful with this newfound power. The first thing that I'm going to do is I had to cheat a little bit to really demonstrate the paint and the composite thing working together, because I turned off my keyer. So in the little crash that I edited out, I came into my roto shape here and added a square that was a little bit too big for the frame and set that so that we had a full-on alpha channel to work with, because without that square I didn't have an alpha channel working. Alright, well, let's come to the keyer now and let's see what we can do with this shot here. So as I said, I wanted to try and find a way of extracting the foliage in front here, and using my little list. Obviously the first stop we're going to do is with a procedural matte. So let's take a look and see if there's any of the colour channels that really stand out strongly. Blue could be pretty good. Red could also be pretty good. Given the choice between those two, I will go with the blue. But let's have a look to see if the luminance is going to help us. And let's come to our primary matte here. And let's see what we got. We got an area here where it's starting to look pretty good. It's something to work on anyway. That's there we go. It's taking that down to about 15. That's looking pretty good. We can start working with that, and we'll see if we can get a secondary matte here to also help us out. And let's look at the red on this time. Let's come in, and we're just trying to take in some of the details we didn't have on the Luma channel. So coming with our combined, we're just bringing those up a little bit more. We might be bringing up some of this stuff a little bit more as well. So yeah, that might be a little bit better. Let's have a look at the composite here. Yeah, that's kind of a little bit better. Well, I say a little bit better, I mean a lot better. Well, now we can see that this is floating around quite nicely. The big problem we have is we've still got a whole load of rubbish that we can't work with. So let's move into our roto here. And I'm going to do this very, very laxly. Basically just create a garbage mat for our gear here. Let's take a look at that. So at the moment we're adding this area in. We want to just subtract it. And let's quickly keyframe that up. So that's matted a lot of that out. We can also take out this area here. We've already done actually a lot of the hard work with the box, so we'll skip that for now. So really what's left for us to do is to try and clean up this alpha channel. Now there are some places where we can come in and use splines with a bit of tracking. So this area here, with the right tracking, we can use just a roto spline just to come in here and pick out a lot of that stuff. Again, have that set to subtract, and maybe even on this, in this case, blur this up just a bit. Cool, but yeah, the problem still remains is that we have, and obviously we would want to, hang on a second, just move that out of the way. This isn't going to be entirely accurate by any stretch of the imagination, but it should give you the idea. Yeah, we've still got a whole load of stuff here, little bits and bobs here, where actually creating a whole load of little shapes here is going to be exceedingly fiddly and time consuming. And it's at this point here, just cleaning up these little areas maybe, that coming in and using the paint might be a faster solution. So come with the colour brush here, just paint on the alpha channel, take our alpha down to 0, and we can just come in here and let's bring the size of that brush up. Maybe not quite that much. Keep it good and soft, maybe take the opacity down a little bit. You might have to go over some of the areas a couple of times, but at least it gives you a bit more subtlety to it. And then come in and do that on the next frame and on the next frame and on the next frame. So this, hopefully this will start to feed into the idea that actually paint shouldn't be the first port of call, especially if you have a super long shot that you have to do, because this stuff here gets pretty tedious and pretty time consuming. It's also another thing is it gets quite tricky to keep it consistent. So even between these 3 frames, and I've done these really quickly, but we have to make sure that we remove the same parts in all 3 frames, because otherwise we're going to start to get some really strange looking footage at the end of it. Things are going to be flicking on, flicking off, and it becomes really visible. If I want to restore a little bit, well, I've taken out a little bit too much, I can come into the eraser and just dab that on. And let's see how that starts to look in context. So let's view the composite. You see we started to clean up that mess there. I want to see it in composite. Well, let's come back to our paint, double click on the composite there. As at this point we can just come in and see what we're doing in a much more interactive sort of way. Cool, well I'm not going to save all the fun for myself. I'm going to let you finish this shot if you want to. I hope that's been useful for you. I'm going to end it here for the time being. That was quite a biggie. We looked at the effects node first and saw some of the tools that we had within there, including the grain and the color stuff. Also the scratch that we could use for getting rid of scratches, wire removal, smaller objects. And then we had a look at silhouette effects, bitmap, paint engine, and some of the fun we could do with that, including some of the replicated effects that we had over from the effects tab. It's also useful to start to sort of be able to mix and match these different nodes in context and understand how they start to work together, and why sometimes you need to add this little composite node in when you want to be checking your work. Exercise 11 is all about getting data in and out, and how we can start to not only output a load of data, but we can use data from other applications to help us within Silhouette Effects itself. It's going to be a whole load of fun. I'll see you there.